Good evening. Today is Thursday, September 2nd, and welcome to the 8:30 show. I'm KJ, and every Thursday night you will find me here at 8:30 p.m. on YouTube at Metro Conservative Media. Please hit the subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. At the same time, I'm also live on Facebook at the Metro Conservative Media page. Please like our page. Join the conversation by commenting on this video and sharing the video. We will respond to your comments during the show. This is a show where I chat with various individuals about their conservative journey. Tonight, my guest is community activist Mavourene Robinson. Mavourene has called Howard County her home for nearly 20 years and brings a wealth of knowledge about public school policies, as well as the federal mandates impacting local level school governance, curricula, and funding. All right.
Hi, KJ.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm happy to be here with you tonight.
I am so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me. And again, we're going to get into the education piece of the show. I generally will start each show with a random question and answer segment, just so the audience can get to know you a little bit better in a fun and cool way.
Okay.
All right. So it's a rapid fire round of questions and answers. All right. So we'll just get right into it. All right. What are you most known for amongst your friends?
Wow. There's a phrase that most of my friends will often say, and it's, she doesn't suffer fools.
Okay.
Now, over time, I've become much more loving in that, but I think that label probably still sticks. I say what I mean, and I mean what I say, and I don't generally waste much time with people whose word I can't trust.
All right. I love that. So, what's your favorite place to eat where is your favorite place to eat in Howard County?
There's this little place called Iron Bridge Wine Bar.
Okay.
It's on Route 108. It's just across from Clark's Ellie Oak Farm. I probably should be asking them for some payment for this advertisement, but it's wonderful. The food is farm to table, always freshly prepared. It's just a wonderful place to go.
Okay. I gotta check that place out. I'm always in Columbia, especially generally Columbia, Howard County, but definitely in Columbia. So
Iron Bridge Wine Bar. Try it out.
I will. I certainly will. All right. This is sort of similar to the first question. What quality do you value most in your friends?
Just honesty.
Okay.
And just really being able, even if the honesty sometimes hurts, right? Because a real friend will tell you the truth to keep you from falling off of a bridge.
Right.
And I think that's what I value most, that I can trust that they will speak the truth to me and will receive when I speak to the truth in them. I don't have to tiptoe around them as friends.
Okay. All right. This one, big party or small gathering?
Small gathering, okay. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. And this one. So getting vaccinated could lead to a free ride to college bound youth in Maryland. Incentives to get vaccinated are cool or should be overruled, in your opinion?
Overruled. Not going to be able to do it.
All right. Okay. All right. And then the last question, who do you prefer? You may like both, you may dislike both. Which one is who do you prefer? If I ask you this, Candace Owens or Kim Klacik?
Wow, that's a tough one. Wow, that really is a tough one. I think I'd say Candace Owens.
Okay. All right. So we that was just like a fun way. So our audience can kind of get to know you, random question and answer. So thank you so much for playing along.
Thank you.
All right. So before we get into the education piece, I want to talk to you about your conservative journey. So you are a Republican.
I am.
Yes. Can you kind of just talk to us about when you became a Republican and why?
Absolutely. I voted Democrat all my life. The very first election that I was old enough to vote in was the historic election of L. Douglas Wilder as the first African American governor in the state of Virginia, the former Confederate capital. And I remember traveling from my college campus home to Virginia to ensure that I voted for Governor Wilder. So I was Democrat, kind of ride or die, not necessarily because I did the research and knew, but it's just that's what I grew up around. That's what my grandparents and parents always taught me. And I'd voted pretty much consistently that way for the better part of 30 years, until there was just a coming together. I call it a confluence of a number of events where things just weren't making sense. The older I became and the more I started to focus on what I saw in the taxes, what I saw with the effect of the GDP, what I saw with families, what I saw with Black families in particular, the promises of the Democratic Party just weren't panning out. But I have to say, KJ, that it was a deeply uncomfortable and even a spiritual change, because voting Democrat as being a Black person was so deeply woven into me. And so I kind of battled it. And I remember there being a period of time where I even fasted and prayed and cried and prayed, and it just didn't make sense to me. And finally, I knew that I needed to register as a Republican. But I will tell you, it was during the early kind of the battle for who would be the general election candidate for the 2016 presidential election. And I had no idea who the candidate would be. I just knew that I was going to register as a Republican and vote Republican. I thought that it would be, what's the man's name out of Ohio? I forget his name now.
Oh, Mitt Romney?
No, I can't remember. And that's probably a good thing, because he soon flipped on abortion. So it's probably a good thing that I can't remember his name, but I just assumed it would be him because he was a little bit more palatable to me. I had no idea.
Oh, I know, John Kasich.
That's it, John Kasich.
Okay.
I had no idea it would be President Trump as the candidate. So when President Trump was nominated, I was sure that I had heard in my own prayer and meditation time to register and vote Republican. And I just at that point decided that I was going to trust my faith and move forward with that. And so I voted Republican for the first time in 2016.
Okay. Now let me ask you this, because I know you are a staunch supporter of the pro-life movement. Have you always been that way, or did you vote Democrat but still were pro-life, or how did that issue factor into your decisions or voting decisions?
I didn't think about it initially, to be honest with you, because it just really didn't hit my radar. Remembering that initially, or at least in the early days, Black Democrats were almost always affiliated with the church. And so it was very easy to be confused or allow yourself to be deceived that because it was Reverend such and such running for Congress, that they were also pro-life. But when I came to college and, there was this, how do we say, I didn't necessarily go buck wild, but I certainly wasn't living as a church girl. I unfortunately chose to abort my first son. And even after having done that for years, I doubled down. I would not call myself pro-abortion, but I would justify it by saying it's a woman's choice. And we have to deal with the consequences. No one should determine our choice. And that didn't hold water. As you mature, and once again, you start to understand and see the creep, that it was no longer about just a woman choosing, it was about it being mandated and then increasingly barbaric, no matter the timing of the abortion or even the post-abortion decisions if the fetus lived. I just could not marry that any longer with my faith.
Okay.
And so I am staunchly pro-life. I no longer even say, they call them abortions, because I think that's a palatable word, but it's murder. I'm grateful for grace. I'm grateful that I've been forgiven for that. But I still have to deal every day with the truth that I could have a wonderful 30-year-old son who might be the young man who's doing great things in such a broken society now, had I not made that fateful decision.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, we could talk about that all night long because I certainly could. But what I want to go into with you as far as education. Schools some have opened, some have and some are going to open after Labor Day. But basically, schools are reopening all across Maryland. Children may be introduced or grappling with all kinds of issues this school year, such as critical race theory in the classroom, gender issues, COVID-19 practices and procedures, all sorts of stuff. And the lockdowns and the results of the past and maybe future lockdowns. What do you feel is the number one issue that our children may face? And I'm talking from K through college. What do you think the number one issue our youth will face or may face this school year, and why?
7 hours a day, 5 days a week, having adults keep their own mental health issues on children. That's the biggest issue.
Oh, okay.
And it predates what has become known now in critical race theory, because in many of the school systems, there have been critical race theories, critical gender theories, critical economic theories being taught to and pushed on our children for years, KJ. And I think in my own example, and I always like to try not to place or generalize things on everyone else, but I can speak about the experience that my family has walked through.
Okay.
I started in this journey with the school system because I have a wonderful young man as a son who was in what I thought was the best school system. And I started to watch each year, little by little, as his identity was being stolen. And what adults thought his identity should be was kind of coming into conflict with who we are created to be internally, and for him, who his mom was teaching him to be. And the battle for children and wanting to be accepted is, who do I listen to? Do I listen to these peers and these adults who are identified as my leaders 5 days a week, 7 or 8 hours a day? Or do I listen to my mom and risk not fitting in when I'm at school? Children are going through that every day, and we're seeing it even in some of the highest zip code income areas, like Howard County, when we consider the number of suicides or the number of sexual assaults or the reported use of illicit drugs. We're seeing it come to a head, and we're getting so lost in each individual issue that we're missing the bigger issue that the teachers' unions and the policies and the curriculum have all been designed to put upon our children what, in many ways, broken adults say, and not what their families are saying, and not what each individual family is teaching their child.
Yeah. And can you go into detail or provide a specific situation or issue you feel is doing this or is happening in the school system by teachers?
Absolutely. We all hear about and deal with bullying and understand how prevalent bullying has become, especially with the advent of social media. But I had a particular experience with bullying that taught me a lot about how the teachers are dealing with our children in many ways that we can't possibly imagine. And it had to do with my son at the time, dealing with two young men. He was only, I think, in sixth or seventh grade at the time, but they had been grouped together for a group project in class. And he was dealing with two young men who had been ostracizing him and bullying him and not allowing him to be a part of the project, this group project. And so he and I just kind of talked about it, and we kind of talked about some ideas how he would deal with it this next week, because it had been going on for a few weeks before he shared it with me. And I reached out to the teacher and I shared with her what had been happening and how my son and I talked about how he would come to school the next day, and if they still did it, that he would kind of stand his ground and he would stop it, and then they would move forward. And I just wanted her to be aware, just in case something happened in the classroom. And so I'll pause because I feel like in that way, I was partnering with or attempting to partner with the teacher and the school system to do what's right in the classroom for all of the children. Well, what happened, KJ, was just mind-boggling, because not only didn't the teacher deal with it, she overtly attacked my son for having, quote unquote, told anybody what is going on in her classroom. Never addressed the bullying students, never addressed the issue, but she attacked my son, demanding that he not ever tell what happens inside of her classroom. Now you take that example and you multiply that 56,000 times, and we wonder why children in school systems don't feel that they have a way out, or don't feel that they can trust their parents, and feel that they have to go along with what's happening inside of those school walls. Because, as I said to this teacher and to the principal, she did nothing any different than a child molester does. When a child molester says to the child, if you tell, I will do this to you. It's the same thing. So we've allowed just kind of a roughshod treatment of our children, and parents are too afraid to be the dislike parent because they want their students to still get good grades. But I just didn't come up in that way. I came up in an area where you have to fight it out.
Right.
And be sure that you take care of your child first, because your child can't take care of or defend themselves. And so we dealt with that, and we dealt with that in a way that in hindsight, I probably should have made a bigger and more public issue out of it, because that teacher is still there.
Okay.
But those are the things that our children are dealing with holistically now, as you think about critical race and critical gender theory. Teachers who are not uncomfortable bullying our children and demanding that they think and behave the way the teacher is telling them. And how dare you ever disclose to your parents what we're demanding of you here, lest we ostracize you. It's a big issue.
It is. It is. This week or recently, Fox 5 DC posted a report and uncovered a video of an American University professor. Her name was Amara Decor. In it, she explains what she thinks is and isn't appropriate to teach about the events surrounding the 9/11 attacks, because we're coming up on 9/11. During the video, she's suggesting teachers use the word extremists instead of terrorists to further disrupt this false equivalence of Muslims and terrorism. She says, and I quote, "We're also not going to reproduce what's understood as American exceptionalism. This understanding that America is a land at the top of a beautiful mountain, and that all other countries, nations, and people are less than America.
Hmm.
Not going to reproduce notions that American history and American experiences are more significant than the experiences or histories of other people.
Hmm.
So again, it's kind of this putting, these teachers or these professors inputting their philosophy or their slant on history. Really, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think this was wrong for her to say? Well, maybe I'm off on this. What are your thoughts?
Oh, it was absolutely wrong, and it was wrong for her to say it. We can't control her beliefs and what she thinks, right? I think that's where we have to start trying to recognize that we can't legislate people's hearts.
Mm-hmm.
But it's pretty ironic to me that this professor at an American university, where people who are depending upon the wealth and the freedoms and the ingenuity in America earn American dollars to pay the $36,000 or so per semester tuition for the students who are paying her salary. It's pretty ironic that she would have a problem with even advancing the idea of American exceptionalism.
Mm-hmm.
America is an exceptional nation, and I want us to stop being afraid to say that. That doesn't make us better than other nations. That doesn't mean that somehow God loves America more than he loves Iran, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that does mean that we have been uniquely positioned and allowed to achieve things that other nations have not. And because we have been, we owe a debt of responsibility to advancing those opportunities and ideas so that other nations or other people might have those same choices. So I just think it's ironic that professors and teachers would hate America so.
Right.
When especially KJ in the public school system, the teachers unions, they're the largest socialized organization in our nation.
Mm-hmm.
But you hate the nation that pays your income and your lifelong benefits and your pensions. It's pretty ironic to me.
Yeah, and you mentioned the teachers unions because before, I would say within the last 2 years or so, I never even knew what the teachers unions did before this session. I always thought the teachers unions were just, unions. I thought they were actually advocating for the children all this time. And then as they were, I guess, as when the pandemic hit and they became so vocal during the pandemic, and so vocal on the side of keeping teachers from going back into schools, I started to really look into it, and I said, well, these teachers unions aren't for the children, they're advocating on behalf of the teachers. And then some of this stuff just wasn't even in the best interest of the children. What are your thoughts on these teachers unions within public schools?
They have too much power. And it can be exemplified in, I think, the mom in Connecticut, I can't remember her name, but the teachers union there filed a restraining order against her for wanting to see the curriculum that her child is being exposed to. So think about that. In the United States of America, a mom who would not take no for an answer, the curriculum by law is and should be public.
Right.
And it's public material. But let's just say by some stretch of the imagination, it wasn't, and it wasn't subject to Freedom of Information Act request. As a parent, we are, obligated to know what on God's green earth they're teaching our children.
Right.
And we should be able to ask for that information and see it. And so for the teachers union to file a restraining order against this mom who would not take no for an answer, and for judges to not immediately throw it out, for it to have to come to the point where it was publicized, and thankfully a well-known legal defense organization come to her rescue before the teachers union decides to drop its case. That's the nation that we now live in. They have too much power, and unfortunately they are not all coalescing around doing what's best for the children, but they are great at messaging that they are. So that we keep voting along the Apple ballot. Think about the power of the Apple ballot. The Apple ballot, I'm telling you, could have a stark, raving, embezzling, whatever. And if it's on the Apple ballot, most voters, most parents don't do the research. They see it on the Apple ballot. They think teacher, good, I'll vote for this individual. And it doesn't always necessarily work out to be that.
So what is I'm not familiar with that term, Apple ballot. What is that?
Oh my goodness. So in every state and every locale during election season, the candidates will lobby the teachers unions. And in my experience, you interview with the teachers unions. They'll do their research first, right? So they already have a preconceived notion about you from what they can learn in the community or how they've engaged with you. But at some point, they give you the opportunity to come in and meet with them, and they interview you, and they ask you specific questions about where you stand on policies and how you would vote on policies. And depending upon your answers, they decide whether they will endorse you or not, because they know that they carry enough power with the uninformed public that when you walk to the ballot booth to cast your ballot and they're outside canvassing, if you get handed a piece of paper that says endorsed by the National Teachers Union, most parents or grandparents are just going to ignorantly vote for that person.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, the assumption is teacher means good, teacher endorsement good, we'll vote for them.
So what are they supporting? Like what issues do they feel are where they would give someone or generally they would give someone their support? You know that?
I think a good place to really get a sense for what the National Teachers Union supports is their website.
Okay.
Because their website actually is very informative about their policies. And I will just say that it probably wouldn't be surprising to any of your listeners or viewers to hear that they are extremely liberal. I will qualify it that not every teacher in the classroom is supportive of their policies, but much like many of the other unions and what the Supreme Court has attempted to deal with, they are forced almost to be dues-paying participants in the union, because if you demonstrate that you're not supportive of the union, you get the worst assignments in the school system. You're not necessarily on favored list status.
Okay. Wow. Okay. And just what you mentioned about the Connecticut mom, we have this where it's becoming this, the classrooms are becoming this secretive place. You know, there's this movement now to get cameras in the classrooms because parents are worried about, the curriculum that these teachers are teaching, what the teachers are talking, saying to the students as far as socially. I mentioned gender issues. That's huge. You now have teachers where they have this power now where if your child comes into class and makes some type of statement of sexuality, they won't inform the parents. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
On cameras in particular? That's a tough one.
Right.
Because here's the reality. If we're so concerned about what they're doing to our children that we feel like there needs to be cameras in the classroom, why do we keep sending our children there?
Yeah, that's true.
And when you think about how the school systems are funded from the federal side based on what's called a maintenance of effort for each student. So for each student in the classroom each year, the federal government or the state government filtered from the federal government will provide X numbers of dollars. Let's say it's $15,000 For every child whose parent decides to pull that child out of the school system, it directly impacts the money that is available to go to the teachers' unions. And so the parents right now, KJ, we're at a critical point in our nation in many areas, but especially in the school systems. The parents right now still have power. They still have the power to say enough. But again, I find that in my experience, parents are more concerned about not offending the teachers so that their children will still get good grades, right? So think about the flip side of the flip nature of that. You have to kiss the teacher's ring, I'll say, and not stand up for your child, or the teacher will bully your child and give them a bad grade. Just think about the sickness in that and how comfortable we've become with allowing that to be the narrative of our public school systems.
Yeah.
There has to be a change, and it won't change if the parents don't make the change.
I agree. I totally agree. We have one question here from Giovanni Patterson. He says, what do you say about places like Baltimore City with a non-elected school board? So I don't know I know you're from Howard County, but in Baltimore City, the mayor appoints the school board, and then the school board appoints the CEO of schools. What are your thoughts on that?
If it's an informed electorate, I don't ever advocate our citizens not being the ones who choose who represent us. My challenge, though, when I think about Baltimore City, in Baltimore City, I've not ever lived there, but it's close to my heart. It's one of the first places I used to visit regularly as a young person, leaving my southern town. And we would visit that area, East Baltimore, so one of the tougher areas, with a childhood friend, and just watching. And this was back in the 80s. I won't date myself, but this was back in the 80s. Just watching the abject poverty, and just everything going on in the city. And since I've been in this area, not really seeing a positive change holistically. There are things that have been done in Baltimore City the same way for 70 years. And it's netted you all nothing good. Things have to change. And so if that means it becoming an elected school board, and somehow there is a concerted effort to inform the electorate, and to not let the powers that be just come in and kind of position who they want to be placed, then that might be a place to start for Baltimore City. But Baltimore City is just plagued by so many things, because when we look around the state, you all actually get the largest amount of dollars in maintenance of effort for every student. You all receive more money than Howard County per student. That's notwithstanding and has nothing to do with the tax base. That's the money that the government gives your school board per student. But it's just not historically seen to be enough inside the school building. I think you all have a new chancellor of schools, and from what I can see, or new CEO, I guess you all call CEO.
Yes.
From what I've been able to read and watch in what she's attempting to do in changing this massive iceberg of what had been happening in Baltimore City into something that can really build leaders. I think you all are on a good path if people can come alongside her in the elected spaces and help her.
We will see. We will see. We have another question here from Evie. Evie, it seems as if our legislators pay more attention to unions and organizations. How do individual citizens and taxpayers grab their attention and hold them accountable?
Stop voting for them. and stop funding them, because Evie is exactly right. It goes back to the funding, right? It goes back to the lobbying. And so for the teachers unions, because they know that they are pretty safe no matter what they do inside the classroom, or no matter what their outcomes are for their student, they are pretty safe in their jobs. They can demand the union dues, and they can support and lift politicians with aspirations for office. And therefore, they then can control and demand what those politicians do once elected. So the breaking of that, mafia has to be our focus, and that has to begin at a ground roots level, I think.
All right. I'll take one more comment. Evie again. Sorry, but you're wrong about CEO Santelises. Oh, are you aware of the scandals that have happened on her watch?
I'm not, and I try not to pretend to know things I don't. No, I'm not.
Yes, we've had several scandals in Baltimore City within the last year, especially during the pandemic. There's been ghost students, where several schools are maintaining these students on the rolls, but they're actually not in school. So it's just been this situation where they're still collecting the money for these students, but they're not in schools. We had one school that was getting, like, I think it was over half of the student body had 0.1 GPAs.
My goodness.
Yeah, it's been awful. So right now there is a movement to actually have Dr. Santelises removed.
And I think that goes back to that maintenance of effort,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's per student.
Right. And that was my next question to you. So if we to hold these unions accountable, these teachers unions, do you advocate pulling the students out? Or, how would we hold them accountable if, in public schools?
Being there. So
Okay.
I'm going to give you all a model of what I saw happen in Howard County. And it was orchestrated flawlessly. And the model is what we see now with the critical race theory. It began with just a what's called restorative justice, and a partnership by one particular national organization with our new superintendent at the time to bring about restorative justice. Because the numbers demonstrated that while Howard County at the time, I think, had less than 13% African Americans, something like 80 or 85% of the young people who were expelled or had the police called on them were African American. Mm-hmm. So the disparity in those numbers were inexcusable. Well, those disparities, rather than dealing with the root causes of those disparities, it left a vacuum, it left desperation. And so the national organization was able to come in and pitch restorative justice. Now, if you've done any research on restorative justice, it sounds great, but generally speaking, restorative justice makes the victim the problem. It somehow is the victim's responsibility. And even the people who designed restorative justice don't know how to measure its efficacy. But it was put in place, and it led to what we started to read around the nation maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where teachers unions were saying, with these new mandates from the then Obama administration that demanded that school systems that had a certain percentage of minorities engaged with law enforcement or expelled, etc., could lose their funding, it made teachers fearful of dealing with students who really needed to be dealt with, right? And so I think in Baltimore City, we saw some videos of students even smacking teachers, right?
Right, because when I think of restorative justice, I think of basically the idea that there have been past systemic wrongs, and so basically you have this administration or leadership are trying to address those because they feel like these wrongs have now had some type of result into the failed numbers or failed whatever they're trying to put through now. So they do something to kind of they go
to
back
make up, right? To mitigate that, right? Or to maybe, using that terminology where we're held back as African Americans, we're held back for 10 seconds while everybody's racing ahead. How do we catch up?
And generally it's they attribute it to racism.
Yes.
Or some type of discrimination.
Yes. But no, that's not it.
Oh,
so
right.
It sounds good, but that's not it.
No.
Restorative justice, in essence, the goal of restorative justice, as it is stated by its designers, is to make up for the negative impact that essentially dealing with your bad choices have caused you. So if you have been expelled from school and somehow or another you also, maybe you didn't graduate on time, or maybe you decided to drop out because school just wasn't fun for you anymore, or whatever the case may be, then somehow or another it becomes the system's responsibility to make up for what you potentially, possibly, conjecturally missed out on for not having completed school and gone on to college. But do you see how almost impossible that is to measure?
Right.
And you leave the person who, or the system that is purported to have caused you that negativity, you leave them being required to fill the vacuum of the failures in your life. It is critical race theory. And it was implemented in school systems long before we knew the terminology critical race theory. And so getting back to your question, how do we deal with it? We have to stay informed and we have to be there, because this particular national organization was able to come into Howard County because we had the disparities in adverse impact for minority students. They were able to sell it as a good thing. This county that was disparately impacting Black students could now make up for what they'd done through restorative justice. The parents didn't look deeply enough to see that it, in essence, is critical race theory. It holds the school system responsible for every individual's choice and outcomes of those choices, and therefore it's almost impossible to restore the justice.
Right.
And it's always been there. And but they coalesced around it. What we miss is the left is very organized. And so they coalesced around it, and they can easily get 500 or 1,000 people at a school board meeting. There would be times where it would be me and one other young lady at the school board meeting. And we'd be seated and surrounded by hundreds of others on the left who coalesced around this idea. And so it's very easy then for the leaders to say, well, the community wants these leftist policies because there's really no one else out here speaking against it. So the way that we can make the change, because it's unrealistic to think that every parent can pull their child out of the public school systems, but every parent does need to get involved with changing the system. So show up, be at the school board meetings, volunteer for the policy committees, make your superintendent uncomfortable, make your school board uncomfortable, make your county executive and your mayor uncomfortable.
And see, and I agree with that. But my question is, when you hear restorative justice, and like you mentioned, you have all these people ganging up or crowding around or surrounding it. It sounds good. Like when people hear, oh, you wronged us, and we have all these African American students failing, and it makes no sense. These students are failing, but you have all these non-African American students passing and doing well. Must be because of race, or must be because they were targeted unfairly. And so this is nice that they're acknowledging it, and we're we're getting back. They're going to do something about all these people that they targeted. And so in order to actually understand that, okay, we have these African American students that are not doing well, but it's not due to race. You have to research and you have to look, okay, well, this person, parents were not in the home and they had, home issues. And so then they started dealing with, I don't know, crime and things like that. So there are so many other factors that go into a lot of these outcomes. But it's easy to just paint a broad brush and say it's due to the race or it's due to the people targeting them. How do we get around that? How do we get around that narrative? Because like you mentioned, the left is organized and they're pushing this, and it's not doing our community any good.
The Black community, and I'll speak again from personal experience, we have to get out of our own way. Mm-hmm. And we have to be willing to hear that bigotry isn't limited to white people. It's not. And so, I know that a lot of celebrities will say that Black people can't be racist because racism implies power, but we can have the same ethnic animosity toward others that others have toward us. And that can sometimes blind us from the truth. And so there are a few things, and it can become just a multi-pronged issue that is tough to encapsulate quickly. But I will say again that there are the issues if people would get involved and look at the data. Mm-hmm. So in Howard County, the data regarding the number of African American children who had access and were placed in gifted and talented courses was abysmal. Get involved enough as a parent or a grandparent to understand why. It's how I first got involved. I was always in my son's classroom. I was reading room mom. I knew every little kid. I knew who could read well and who couldn't. And as early as kindergarten, they start to funnel our children. It sounds cute, right? When you have a young child and they come home and their teacher has aligned them to the golden retrievers table. And then you have the Chihuahua table. Mm-hmm. And then you have the Labrador table. It sounds really cute and benign. But what was really happening, I found, is that that's where the teachers start to place children based upon how he or she is interpreting our child's potential.
Okay.
In our example, maybe second grade, I see my son, he was never seated at the lower two tables, but he was never seated at the higher table, right? And this is second grade. But I know these children and I've watched them. I've been reading room mom. Again, I know their vocabularies. Why is it that my little kid who has a vocabulary that I'll brag a little bit, it was exceptional, right? They talk about children knowing 10,000 words before kindergarten readiness. So 10,000 plus. But he's seated at a table and little Johnny, who can barely write his name and articulate 20 words, is seated at this other table. And I know that the other table, mostly Asian children, I know that other table is doing more complex work. That's how I actually first got started in this, because I wanted to understand how the school systems interpret the data to determine where they are placing our children. And once I delved more deeply and started to attend the policy committees and read the data and read the policies, I recognized that there is a level of bias. We can't get around it.
So you're saying that they moved, you believe they did move your son based off of his race?
Yes.
Oh.
And it came to a head, again, because I'm that mom. I really don't care if you like me, if I'm protecting my child or a child who I've been asked to take care of. And so it came to a head when I started asking questions. And the teacher said very clearly to me, it's none of your business how I run my classroom. And that was just kind of like, the old school moment. Like, did she really just say that to me? And so just pressing in. 2 weeks later, I get this call, and it's kind of random. I don't know what your son has done in 2 weeks, but suddenly he's reading at this higher level. So we're moving him to the retrievers table. I just kind of laughed and said, no, suddenly. It wasn't suddenly. He always was. But in the school systems, it's very rare that I found in speaking with friends and family around the nation, it's very rare that I found teachers don't have an implicit bias as it relates to the potential for African American students. But parents are the best weapon there, not leaving the vacuum so that evils like critical race theory become the best option. Do you see what I'm saying?
And so, what do you mean? What do you mean that how would a teacher use critical race theory as the best option there in that situation?
No, what I mean is because the parents haven't stepped in, this narrative that the entire school system is racist, therefore we need critical race theory to make it better. That entire narrative is built on the vacuum of parents not having done their part.
Well, let me ask you, because you're saying that your son was misplaced and you believe it was due to his race.
Mm-hmm.
So do you believe this is something that is a massive issue? I mean, it sounds like you do believe that these teachers are misplacing African American students. And so that basically, to me,
it's equal opportunity, equal access. And remembering that most teachers, if you look at the data, most teachers are white women.
Mm-hmm.
And there is nationally just an understanding that they don't always see the potential fully, right? There's a disparity in the potential that they see in non-white students often,
Mm-hmm.
not holistically, but often.
Mm-hmm.
We found ourselves in this position now in our nation where the left can say that critical race theory is the only option because parents have chosen not to deal with the issue individually. I didn't leave that situation with my son and say, you know what, the whole school system is racist, so now I need to teach every white child or teach every white family that they're evil and hold them back so that my son can have a chance. Do you see the difference there? Am I making my point clear there?
I see. I think I see it. So you're saying that these teachers who generally are white have an implicit bias against Black students and in general. And so instead of responding to that with critical race theory, you believe that parents should be more involved.
Yes.
To point that out.
Parents should be more involved to point that out. Parents in the community together should be more involved with building the bridges and holding the school system accountable individually, not applying a negative label or a negative system or a freedom stealing system like critical race theory as a Band-Aid. Mm-hmm. And that's, I believe, where we are as an African American community. We've been so hurt by these implicit biases that we can't see where we're the most powerful people to change the situation in America in our individual families and individual scenarios.
I got you. I see. Okay, I have another question here. She's been asking questions the whole time we're talking. Evie again. She says, curious, Do you advocate more Black teachers to teach Black students, or do we want good teachers to teach all students?
Good teachers to teach all students.
I see.
To say more Black teachers to teach Black students, it's not realistic with what our Black students will encounter in the world. Like, if we want to raise individuals who can function in every sphere of society and every sphere of the world, it's pretty unreasonable to demand that they're only taught by people who look like them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it goes back to quality, not quantity. Because to say more Black teachers to teach Black students without there being a quality element, that's critical race theory. That's affirmative action.
Mm-hmm. Now, so would you say then that a good teacher, or let's even say a good white teacher, would not have some type of implicit bias? Or how do we get around this implicit bias then?
It's a heart thing, and I think it's relational.
Right. Okay.
It's relational, and it has to be, to a certain extent, it does have to be designed,
mm-hmm.
right? Because if the teachers in my case, and I will just say we were in Clarksville, Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
So there weren't a lot of African Americans in the school system in Clarksville, Maryland. Not a lot of the teachers, the tenured teachers, had close, consistent, intimate relationships outside of their limited sphere of choice.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that way, it goes back to it being relational, like everything else. You don't know a person until you've broken bread with them.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what their heart is until you've allowed them in your home. And I used to say when I was in corporate America, we have to look past whether they are the people who are members of our social club or members of our yacht club, and instead look at them as people and get to know them as individuals. Step outside of the yacht club, step outside of the social club, and get to know people for who they are.
Let me ask you one more question on this topic. So let's say you have someone listening and they say, okay, we have determined that some of these teachers do have an implicit bias against Black students. And say you don't have parents that pick up on this. And so these teachers have misplaced these students, causing possibly a disproportionate misplacement all the way up. Why isn't critical race theory or restorative justice, which says you all made these errors, now we need to go back and based off of these errors, because this has had some type of negative effect all the way up through college? Why is it wrong to say this needs to be addressed? And I don't even know how they would address it.
I know. And here's what I've got to say about that. Neither critical race theory nor restorative justice give any solutions. They are pot-stirring theories that build disunity, but they don't have any solutions. So to think about critical race theory in particular as an example in that person's question, and it's a good question, but critical race theory essentially says that white people are born racist. Mm-hmm. You can't really show me a gene though, right? So they're all science until you ask them to show me a racist gene in our bodies, in our DNA. But critical race theory essentially says all white people are born racist, or by virtue of your American experience, you're racist and you don't even know you're racist. Well, the answer to that does not include any practical, sustainable, and again, equality-driven opportunities to correct for those biases that we have experienced in America generationally. What they instead have done, and what frustrates me so that Black people are swallowing this poison pill, what they have instead done and said is, and because you all perform so poorly, we are now going to dumb down our curriculum. We're going to make sure that the playing field is brought to a lower denominator, because then maybe Black people will be able to compete better. So think about the recent case out in, I think it's Loudoun County, Virginia.
Right.
They didn't even hide it. They publicly said that they're dumbing down their math curriculum so that minorities will have a better chance, rather than, again, giving us equal access and equal opportunity so that our students have the same tutoring, have the same ability with curriculum and books, have the same support from teachers and educators to learn and become better mathematicians. So critical race theory and restorative justice, they don't come with solutions. They just come with stating problems, overstating problems, and blaming the problem on things that are just abjectly wrong.
Let me go to the comments here. I have one here. Kells says, what would you suggest to a parent that has a child who doesn't want the parent to speak up, fearing the fallout?
Oh, that was my kid. So here's the thing. Once he got older, because I pulled him out of public school in 8th grade, but once he got a little bit older, out of maybe 3rd or 4th grade, we had a conversation, and I started to talk to him about the level of issues and when he would feel comfortable bringing the issues to me. And the way I defined it to him was, I trust you. We will kind of role play like we did in that 7th grade issue where the teacher threatened my child and I had to deal with her. Mm-hmm. But he only brought that to me after he couldn't deal with it himself and he needed me to come in. Because the role play that we did throughout those years were to prepare him to deal with real life, right? They will have to deal with issues. And if we've not prepared them to do so as parents in our home, the world is going to eat them up. And the label I gave it when he pulled me in is, when you pull mom in, it's napalm.
Yeah.
Right? So before you pull mom in, I want to know that you have attempted to speak with and deal with the student, that you have attempted to tell your teacher or the principal and have conversation, that you have not been responsible for the issue, right? In my house, we talk brass tacks. Don't ever start a fight. Don't bully anyone. But if someone brings a fight to you, you have mom's full support to win that fight. Mm-hmm. And then I'll deal with the adults.
But what if it's a situation where you see something and the child may be struggling with something, but the child is saying, and this may be a teenager or a preteen, no, mom, or no, dad, I don't want you guys to do it. But you feel like this is something that your parent needs to handle.
Then the parent needs to be the parent and deal with it. Because, and that goes back to one of the early examples, KJ, when I said we are in a place in America now where we're allowing our children to be bombarded with the most egregious abuses in their emotions and their mental state. And we choose not to get involved for whatever reason, right? So yes, the student might say, no, mom, I don't want you involved. But underlying that, the student is saying, I don't want you involved because my teacher might get mad at me, or because if the students found out my mom or dad got involved, they're going to bully me. Mm-hmm. We're missing something there. It should not be so easy for a system like the school system that is so prevalent in the care of our children, essentially to be holding them hostage. Get involved and then take your child on a vacation and just allow them to relax and vent. But please don't leave your children feeling that they have no one to support them and protect them, and they're swinging out in the wind.
Right. All right, we are coming at the end of the time. I do want to play this clip for you and get your thoughts on this. This is a report that actually Project Veritas uncovered recently, and I want to get your thoughts on this clip.
Okay.
Let's see.
A California high school teacher brags about politically indoctrinating his students.
He also said that he knows of at least 3 other teachers at the school that are on the same page as him.
The district is aware of the video, but they're not saying much about the content.
Parents tell us that they do plan to protest at tonight's school board meeting that is scheduled for later this evening.
If you're a member of Antifa, of a terrorist organization, I don't think you really have a right to stay out of prison.
Indercom High School's Gabriel Geib admitting that he and a growing number of teachers use the classroom to push communist propaganda.
Gabriel Geib, that has been teaching these kids about Antifa, racism. He's been teaching these kids about literally the KKK on the low.
It's kind of a psychological illness. Clearly, that's what we're dealing with here to a certain extent, to have someone, believe these ideologies and contradict themselves so clearly.
After shaming teenagers who don't follow his political views, the so-called anti-fascist went on to praise the Chinese Cultural Revolution.
He is advocating, defending, placating genocide that occurred in the Cultural Revolution.
He's got the swastika on the wall. He's stamping their work. Look at this. What the f***? And my daughter literally messaged me like, Mom, what's wrong?
He then explains how he tracks his students' political views. Every semester, he requires them to take a political ideology quiz and submit a picture of their face. He then puts the picture of their face on the classroom wall right next to their political ideology.
Every year, they get further and further along. Like, I have an Antifa flag on my wall. And a student complained about that, and he said it made him feel uncomfortable. Well, it's meant to make fascists feel uncomfortable, so if you feel uncomfortable, I don't really know what to do.
KJ, are you sitting down?
Yes.
That's activist civics.
Yeah.
And it's a part of the curriculums in counties like Howard County.
What?
It's activist civics. They're not as overt as what was shown inside of his classroom. But very clearly, I have had reports from students, and even in our 8 years there, the activist teacher is alive and real. It's probably the exception, not the rule, for there to be school districts where they are not prevalent, because they understand in far better ways than other people do, that if they can get into the minds of our children when they are young, right, they are training them up in the way that they think they should go. Because to indoctrinate them early is guarantee for them promulgating their beliefs and ideas to the next generation. And so what this young man is doing out in California, it's activist civics class on steroids. But in most school districts, it's actually called activist civics.
Yeah. What has happened over the last, I'd say 10 years? What has happened? Because I remember, and again, like I mentioned, when I was in college, which was late 90s, early 2000s, I worked in Columbia, and I worked in the mall. I worked at the Nordstrom. And I remember, like it was yesterday, people used to come in, these women, and they say, oh, this Nordstrom is so, why don't we have a better Nordstrom here in Howard County? This is, we're supposed to be the richest county in the country, I think at that time. And the school system, people used to talk about how good the school systems were, and people were moving to Howard County because you didn't have to pay for private, and you put your son or daughter in public school. And now we have these teachers and you have these issues going on. What happened in the last 10 years or so?
I have friends whose children went through the systems and now have children in the system here in Howard County. Mm-hmm. And so they've seen the system for the better part of the last 30 or 40 years. Mm-hmm. And some of them report that as far back as 30 or 35 years ago, there were teachers of a more conservative bent, many of them Christians, who were warning them about the things that were starting to happen. Oh. But I think, like many of us, they just didn't believe that it could ever really be. Mm-hmm. And so nothing was done. And so, for lack of a better way of saying it, that beast was allowed to strengthen and grow and become more powerful, such that now teaching has become a career of choice for leftists.
Yes.
Because they know that's where they can have the greatest impact, again, on the next generations. Conservatives have either bowed out or they hide. They don't voice their conservative views. They don't stand against the tide inside of the school systems, because then the union comes down on them and they get the worst assignments or they get treated horribly. And so what's happened is we allowed that beast to grow. And now the beast is so powerful, we have to take a stand and say enough is enough.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Like I said, I could go on and on with you.
This has been great.
Yeah.
This has been great. It's not my comfort zone, but I love you.
Yes, it is. And you're such a wealth of knowledge. I'll ask you just the last question. So just last week, I was talking with some of my friends. Sometimes I just feel like we are at a point, and I'm a person of faith. I'm a Christian. I feel like I'm just so frustrated. I feel like I know it's end times, but I just feel like everything is being thrown at us. Mm-hmm. And, coming for the children in school, churches aren't even there supporting biblical principles anymore. I feel like, is this time where what should we do? Is this time where we at war? Is this it? Or should we go?
Yeah, that's the thing, KJ. We've always been at war. We just didn't believe it. It didn't act like we were. And so it's a spiritual battle. Mm-hmm. And it is a battle between good and evil. And there really isn't a gray area. There's no in between.
That was my question. Yeah. Okay.
There isn't a gray area. I lived most of my life trying to stay in the gray area. Mm. I didn't want people to think that I was too churchy or holy roly, or I didn't want people to think that I didn't love. Unfortunately, what that meant was I compromised. Right. And the compromise always leads to the erosion of what is truth.
Oh!
You can't compromise.
I'm writing that down.
There is right and there is wrong. There is good and there's evil. In critical race theory, or critical theory overall, because we know it's not just race, there's gender, there's economic, there are a whole lot of aspects to that critical theory, Marxist ideology. But that essentially says to people, not only can't you believe that there is one God, Yahweh, but you have to believe what we tell you to believe when we tell you to believe it, and give your children over to us so that we can do to them, with them, what we will to appease our appetites. This is war. The good news is that scripture is true, whether people believe it or not. And we can only say, stand by and see. Everything that can be shaken will be shaken. Everything. And for our children, it's important that we start to stand up for them. So as few of them as possible going forward are pulled into this lie that only their flesh matters. Everything that can be shaken, KJ, will be shaken. And we have always been at war. It's just that the church was too afraid and wanted to be too nice to fight. It's time to fight. Because we win. We win.
All right. All right. Well, thank you again for chatting with me tonight. Please share your website so people can check it and find
Absolutely
there.
Absolutely.
To post it for you.
Absolutely. It's a blog and it's redeemedemasculator.wordpress.com. And the title is purposeful. And so I hope that it is both enlightening and it's the place where apathy comes to die is what I say that it is. Apathy comes to die there.
All right. All right. Well, yes, definitely check that out. We will also have this posted on our website and our social media so you can find Mavourene there. All right. So again, thank you so much, guys, for staying with us. This wraps up this episode of the 8:30 show. Again, we are all over social media under Metro Conservative Media. Like, share, and leave a comment, and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. Also, check out our webpage, www.metroconservativemedia.com. We love to get your feedback. I hope to connect with you again next Thursday at the same time. Wishing you warm days and starry nights. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, KJ. Bye-bye.
Bye.